Welcome to the Exchange Server 2016 course on transport services. This course is part of a 4-part series of courses that we're developing. The first one is Exchange Infrastructure, the other one is Exchange Client Access Services, the other one is Exchange Mailbox Database, and this one is Transport Services. Transport Services is really important in Exchange, and we're going to cover a lot of detail around that. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Martin Coetzer. I'm a content developer at Microsoft Learning, and I'm responsible for creating content and training for Skype for Business, Exchange, and Office 365. I'm MCSA in Office 365, and so on. Before I joined this team in Redmond to develop training, I was a consultant in the field where I developed a lot of training and also implemented these products for customers in the field, Exchange, Skype for Business, and so on, and did Office 365 migrations. And before I did that, I was a software developer on mainframes. With me is Joe. Joe is a seasoned professional himself, and I'm going to let him introduce him to you as well.
Thank you, Martin. My name is Joe Turick. I'm a consultant with Olive & Goose. Olive & Goose is based out of Seattle. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina myself. I've been with Olive & Goose for just shy of a year now, primarily working in Exchange and Office 365 technologies in the capacity of technical writing and working with customers like yourself. Prior to my employment with Olive & Goose, I was a support engineer with Microsoft for about 16 years, mostly on the Exchange support team, and primarily focusing on helping customers with problems with Outlook Web Access, what's known as Outlook on the web now, Exchange Active Sync, Outlook connectivity in general. So you're right, transport's a very important topic. Otherwise, there'd be no mail flow. So I'm looking forward to talking about it for the next couple of hours.
Wow. Okay. So you guys are in really good hands when it comes to everything Exchange. So the first thing that I want to remind you guys is this course is part of an appetizer that we are creating that will get you to also look at the edX course. Microsoft is actually publishing a lot of edX courses online, and there's a link there, aka.ms/cld208-4. So it's the one that focuses on transport services. So we're going to cover a lot of detail in this course, but if you want to know more, then I would recommend that you check out that course and take it on the edX platform. So this course will do an overview of transport and routing in Exchange, or I should say routing. That's the American way of saying it. And then we are going to look at how do you configure transport and routing. And then we're going to go into message security. You know, a lot of organizations, the number one way that viruses is now introduced in the organization is via email. A lot of other organizations, in the old days, it was people carrying in floppy disks from home and then infecting internal machines, also maybe CDs and things like that. But now the number one way of infecting internal machines is via email, and also people browsing the wrong websites on the internet. So it's important that you think about message security as well. Then we're going to go into high availability. Obviously, if mail flow is down and you can't receive mail, then email is pretty boring. You want to send email to somebody else. We're going to look at antivirus solutions and anti-spam solutions as well in this course. So let's get started. But before I get into the transport itself, I want to set the target audience and set some expectations. We want to make sure that you are an Exchange Server 2016 IT professional. You're interested in deploying Exchange 2016, or you're currently supporting Exchange 2016, then this course is for you. If you are not interested in Exchange Server 2016, then you should check out some other courses on the Microsoft Virtual Academy. We also suggest that you have the base knowledge of Windows Server and what Windows Server can do, including Active Directory, DNS, and networking, because a lot of things that we're going to talk about will rely on that knowledge, like DNS and networking and so on. Like I said, if you're interested in those other topics, then join the MBA community and look at some of the courses that we have on Active Directory and DNS and so on, networking, and learn about all the Microsoft products out there and become part of a 3 million user community that is interested in Microsoft products. So let's get started with the Exchange transport and routing infrastructure. So in this module, we're going to look at the different transport services and components that is necessary in Exchange to make that mail get from one point to another. This is what email servers are for. We're going to talk about routing destinations and delivery groups, and this is the decisions that Exchange uses to decide what's the next hop where it will deliver messages to, and how mail flow generally works inside of Exchange 2016. So with message transport services, this is really the concept of sending mail, and the way this works primarily is through SMTP. Your Exchange server runs SMTP and wants to send messages to another server. So there's a SMTP receive side that's able to receive messages from other servers, and then there's also SMTP send side that's able to send messages to other servers. That's the main mechanism that Exchange uses to send and receive mail. Inside of this components, we have the categorizer. The categorizer is a component that once it receives the email, it needs to decide where to send the mail to. So it will then say, oh, I need to send this to another server because the database is on another server, or I need to send it to another site because the user is on another site, or this is a user that is not internal to my organization, so I need to send that message out again so that people can receive that message on the other side.
Including bifurcating messages
Yeah.
when it's sent to multiple recipients. It does some other things too. It converts the content format, applies to organizational message policies. The categorizer is a very important component.
Yep. And then we also have another concept in the SMTP stack, and that is the pickup and replay directories, which is provided on Mailbox servers, where you can lay down messages in a folder where Exchange will then say, oh, there's a message for me, and it will pick up that file and then bring it into the transport system and deliver it to a destination. So if you have an application that needs to send messages, it can then leave a message in there, or sometimes in a recovery scenario where you need to export messages from one server, you can then put those messages in the pickup or replay directory. And depending on how what you want to achieve, you will either use the pickup directory or the replay directory. The store driver is the driver that's running on the Exchange servers that interacts with the databases. So at the end of the day, the message needs to be delivered to a database. So there's a store driver that allows you to interact with.
So there's really, in the transport services in Exchange 2016, there's actually three top-level services. You have the front-end transport service, which runs in the client access services layer. If you want to learn more about the client access services layer, you want to see the edX course on client access services. There's also the transport service, and which is very similar to what the hub transport service was like in 2010 and 2013. And then the Mailbox transport service, which is actually comprised of two services, the Mailbox transport submission service and the Mailbox transport delivery service. And the store driver is actually a component related to both the submission and the delivery service. And from an end user perspective, when you send an email and notice that it's sitting in the outbox, okay? It's actually the store driver that picks up that message from the outbox of the user, sends it to the submission queue.
Okay.
And then once that happens, then the end user will see it in the sent items folder. All that is done by the store driver.
Yep. So let's look at a diagram and it summarizes exactly what Joe just said. The three components of the Exchange server in terms of transport is the front-end transport service, which runs as part of client access services. Then we have the transport service itself, which is similar to the hub transport, which is which have queues, messages that that needs to go out and in. We have a pickup directory, as I said, where it can pick up files and send it to the server. The replay directory as well. The categorizer is really the engine that decides what is the routing destination that it needs to send to, and then puts that in the delivery queues to be sent out. And then you have the Mailbox Transport Service, which is the two sides, the Mailbox Transport Submission Service as well as the delivery service. The one side picks up messages from the outbox and sends it out. And then the other one is the one that accepts messages from the internet and puts it in the user's inbox so that the user can read that mail in his mailbox. So that, in a nutshell, is the transport architecture that we're going to cover in this course. So if we go into just a high-level summary of these, the front-end transport performs SMTP proxying. So it doesn't do any queuing of messages. It accepts that SMTP connection, identifies the user that the message is for, and then makes a connection to a hub transport service in the backend so that it can then be queued on the hub transport servers. And then finally, the Mailbox Transport Service is that component that interacts with the database to deliver messages to the database or also collect messages from the database that needs to be sent out. And this is the only service that talks to the database on RPC. No other service is allowed to talk to the database on RPC because this is the service that will finally put emails in the database. So let's talk about some routing destinations and delivery groups. So important to remember here is when Exchange does email routing, it needs to decide what is the next hop for those messages. Where does it need to go? It's got a mail message and now it needs to make a decision. The categorizer needs to make a decision on what is the best place to store that message. In some cases, it's got one message, but it now knows that, for example, this message was addressed to multiple people. So I need to split up this message.
Bifurcate.
The term they use is bifurcate this message into multiple messages so that it can go to the destinations that it needs to go. As well as maybe this is an internet message, or this is a user in another site, or this is a user in another DAG. So all of these are routing destinations where the message can go to. And so Exchange decides based on these destinations, the delivery groups that it's going to place these messages in so that it can get one step closer to the final destination. Exchange also uses your Active Directory sites and the site cost that you've assigned in Active Directory. When you set up Active Directory replication, then you say to Active Directory how your network looks, because you have different domain controllers all over your network, and you want to tell Active Directory that it should use a specific link to do the replication. And Exchange just inherits this information from Active Directory directly and uses that in its main mail flow decisions to send mail to the next hop. Exchange will always try and send the message to the final hop. So if it sends it receives a message and it knows this mailbox is on another user on the other side, it will try and deliver to that site directly, to a mailbox server in that site. If it cannot connect to that server, because maybe there is no network connectivity, direct network connectivity, then it will use information in Active Directory sites to determine what is the next closest site. And this is what they call the back-off path. So they would say, oh, maybe I can't connect to the East Coast directly. There's maybe some server in the Midlands somewhere that I can connect to first, and then that server will be able to connect to the final destination. So, and it determines this from Active Directory configuration. So some of the message routing decisions that Exchange server knows is it knows now about database availability groups. So it runs on the Mailbox server, and so it can determine the destination of where the message needs to go based on this information. if it's a DAG, it knows that I need to get this message maybe to the DAG, a server inside the DAG, so that it can be highly available, replicated inside of that DAG. So it's a lot more precise in determining the next hop. Also, a thing that you need to be aware is that Exchange 2016 no longer supports this concept of a linked connector. A linked connector was a type of connector where you set up a receive connector and a send connector, and you sort of link the two with each other so that you can maybe get a mail, send it to another server, maybe a compliance server or something, where it makes a copy of that message and then sends it back into the Exchange organization. And Exchange no longer supports this. It wants to be in control of that message inside of the organization end to end. So we don't longer support link connectors. In Exchange, you have routing decisions and you have delivery groups. A routing destination is where a mail message needs to go to. So there's three options. So it could be a mailbox database, because this user is a user that exists inside of the database. So when a message comes in, it gives this message a routing destination. This message needs to go to this database. Or it could be a connector. A connector is a mail that goes out of your organization. So this message is destined to the internet. So the routing destination is a specific connector. Or a message could be if there's a message that needs to go to a distribution group, and you designate a distribution expansion server. In some organizations that's really large, they have expansion servers where that expands the message or bifurcates the message into multiple messages, and you want to designate a specific server to do that because you don't want to impact your users. Then the routing destination for a message would be, no, before you do anything, go to the expansion server first and then do your bifurcation there, and that will create multiple messages, and those messages will then be sent to the final destination. Exchange also have delivery groups. Delivery groups is what is the next hop that message needs to go to. So you have your routable DAG. So for this message to get closer to the next spot, you say, oh, I need to get it to this delivery group of a DAG, because in that DAG, the Exchange server will figure out which one server is the mailbox server, and it will then queue that message to the specific server to deliver it to the right database. Or it could be a mailbox database delivery group, because this is a single server and there's no DAG connector. Or there could be a connector source server or some Active Directory site. This server is in another side of the world, it's inside of another site, so that this delivery group, to get it closer to the destination that it needs to be, is a specific site, and so I'm going to deliver it to that site. Or it could be a serverless, when it's a single server. This is the next hop of that message, so that is the delivery group. So for every message that comes in, the categorizer decides two things. It decides the routing destination, that's the final destination of that message, and the delivery group, where do I need to deliver this message? I know this message, I have this message, I need to deliver it to a next place so that this message can be delivered to its final destination. So it decides those two things to get to the final destination. Let's look at mail flow inside of Exchange Server 2016 and how this routing happens inside of the files, the front-end transport service and the mailbox transport service. So let's look at some of the routing decisions that these concepts or these components do. So the first thing that we can highlight is the front-end transport server will attempt to anchor on the recipient. So if a message comes in the front-end transport, it knows from the protocol traffic that this message is for a specific user. So this front-end transport server will then know that a specific user is in a database on this server in the DAG. So it will then proxy that connection to the hub transport service on that mailbox server, because that's the best decision for that message.
Using SMTP, of course.
Yeah, using the SMTP protocol traffic to determine that. So the front-end transport will look up the recipient in AD to find the DAG the recipient belongs to, or the database, and where the server is. And then it will attempt to route the mail to that mailbox server in that DAG, preferably in the same site as the client access server. So that is how, it's very simple routing, but it's just making the job easier, and we don't introduce unnecessary hops. If I send it to any random server in a DAG and it needs to then go to another server internally again, Exchange can handle that, but it's just building a bit of intelligence into that proxy to get closer to the final destination.
And so from the front end transport service, then it contacts the transport service of that particular mailbox server.
Yes. So that is where we come to the transport pipeline, where once messages comes into the transport service on the Exchange server, and that runs on a different port. You know, remember we said previously that in the front end, everything, all the protocols that comes in is the same that comes out. So this is SMTP that comes into the server, and that will be SMTP on the front end transport that comes out again. But this runs on another port 2525. So it's not the default SMTP port 25. It will then receive this message and place it in a submission queue. And then you see all the things that the categorizer do. It first resolves the recipients. So it sees, oh, this message is for this user, this message is for another user. And then it will then find the best route for that recipient. Say, well, this is a local database user, or this is a user in another site, and so on. And then the categorizer will also do the content conversion. So if you say it needs to do that, it will convert that content. So if we look at this animation of this message, it comes into the mail queue, and this is then a marker is placed in the submission queue, and it basically then deals with this message through the categorizer. It resolves the message, it finds a route for that message, and then it does the content conversion. You may have rules to say, I don't want to receive any HTML mail, so it converts it to plain text, or it converts it to rich text, or something like that, or it converts rich text to plain text, or something like that. And then it bifurcates the message. That's a fancy name for splitting the message into multiple messages if it is destined to multiple recipients. And then once that is done, the message is bifurcated. It's then placed into the delivery queue for local deliveries, or internal delivery queue for other messages, and it's sent out to the internet. So that wraps up our session on overview of the transport services. We are going to go into much more detail in terms of how transport services work in Exchange, and stay tuned for that.